I kept my wife unaware I am the anonymous investor with $10 billion worth of stock in her father's firm. She always perceived me as living simply. One day, she asked me to join her parents for dinner. I desired to witness their treatment of a poor, naive man. But the instant they slid an envelope over the table. Can you imagine living a double life for years, harboring a secret so immense it could either protect everything you loved, or absolutely shatter it all? What if that secret wasn't some dark past, but that you were quietly one of the richest men in the country, while everyone, especially your father-in-law, thought you were barely scraping by? And then, one night, he tried to pay you to abandon his daughter, the woman you loved more than anything. My story begins in a neighborhood where hope felt like a luxury, and dreams expired before they could even breathe. My childhood apartment was sandwiched between a laundromat that never closed and a convenience store that had been robbed so often, the owner stopped replacing the security camera. Every night, I fell asleep to arguments bleeding through paper-thin walls, sirens wailing towards another disaster, and the quiet, heartbreaking sound of my mother weeping as she counted coins under a flickering fluorescent light. My father had walked out when I was 4, leaving nothing but a broken promise to send money. My mom, Maria, worked 2 jobs. Cleaning offices before dawn, serving tables until midnight. Her hands were raw, her eyes perpetually tired. She never complained, not once, but I saw the exhaustion etched into every line of her face, deepening with each passing year. From as early as I can remember, I understood that money wasn't just currency, it was survival. It was the difference between eating and hunger, warmth and cold, keeping our crumbling apartment, or ending up like the families sleeping in cars. I learned to count pennies before I learned to read, sorting coins into neat piles, calculating how many more she'd need for the electric bill or my school supplies. While other kids played with toys, I played with numbers. They were logical, orderly, they never lied, never broke promises, never disappeared in the night. Numbers became my refuge, my secret language in a world that made no sense. When I was 8, I found a discarded newspaper. In the trash. And something in that coffee-stained business section, columns of stock prices, market analyses, it looked like a beautiful, ancient code waiting to be deciphered. I smuggled that newspaper home like stolen treasure, spent hours staring at the numbers, trying to understand the patterns, the rises and falls. I started collecting more, digging through recycling bins, building a library of financial pages under my bed like sacred texts. One night, my mom found me at 3 a.m., hunched over a calculator I'd bought for 50 cents, filling notebooks with equations. She asked me what I was doing, with such worry in her voice that I felt ashamed. But I explained, in my small voice, that I was learning how money worked. How people who had money made more money. How if you understood the rules, you could change everything. My mom knelt beside me that night, her knees creaking from years of hard labor. She took my face in her work-roughened hands and told me something I'd never forget. Being poor wasn't a moral failing. It didn't make you less worthy or less intelligent. But the world was designed by those with wealth to keep wealth circulating among their own kind, while everyone else fought for scraps. She said if I truly wanted to change my life, I'd have to be better than good, work harder than hard, and never, ever let anyone make me believe I deserved less because of where I started. She told me she was proud, and if I kept studying those numbers, one day I might not just understand money, but master it. From that moment, I attacked my education with a ferocity that frankly, scared my teachers and isolated me from my peers. While others barely paid attention, I absorbed every lesson as if my life depended on it, because in so many ways it did. I read every book in our small school library, then walked 3 miles to the public library to devour theirs. I taught myself advanced math from textbooks meant for college students, reading books on economics and finance under my blankets with a flashlight after my mom thought I was asleep. By middle school, I was the weird, poor kid who never talked about sports, but could calculate compound interest in his head. I had no friends, not really. Friendship required money, time I didn't have. Instead, I worked under the table, because I was too young. Mowing lawns, delivering newspapers, helping the elderly man down the hall. Every penny went into a coffee can in my closet. Every penny in that can was a promise. We would not always live this way. Then, when I was 13, my mom got sick. A cough, she insisted, was nothing. But it grew worse, week by week, until she could barely breathe. She refused to see a doctor because we had no insurance. She knew what medical bills could do, crush families. I watched helplessly as she grew thinner, paler, weaker, until she collapsed at the diner during her shift. The ambulance took her to the county hospital. A tired doctor with kind eyes delivered news that shattered my world: severe pneumonia. She needed treatment that would cost thousands of dollars we absolutely didn't have. I emptied my coffee can. Every penny I'd saved over years. It was $643. Not enough. Not even close. Not a fraction. I sat beside her bed, holding her hand, feeling more powerless than ever. All my studying, all my intelligence, meant nothing when the cruel mathematics of poverty decided if someone lived or died. But my mom, her eyes fever bright, made me promise something. Don't quit school. Don't sacrifice my future to save her present. Continue my education, no matter what. Because that was the only path out of the trap we were born into. I promised, even though the words tasted like betrayal. She survived, barely. Discharged with medication she couldn't afford and bills that would haunt us for years. She returned to work too soon. I watched her health never quite recover, watched her age a decade in months. That experience marked me. It seared into my soul the understanding that wealth wasn't about luxury, it was about power. The power to protect the people you loved. To never choose between medicine and rent, food and electricity. My determination hardened. I graduated high school at 16, 2 years early, with perfect grades. A full scholarship to the state university. My mom cried when I showed her the acceptance letter, tears of joy mixed with sorrow, because she knew it meant I'd move away. The day I left, she gave me the only thing of value she owned, a small golden locket that had belonged to her own mother. Sell it, she said, if you ever need money. I never sold that locket. It rests against my heart, a talisman, a reminder of everything I'm fighting for, everyone I cannot fail. University life was a different world. Students complained about late allowances, while I worked 3 part-time jobs to afford food beyond my meal plan. I studied finance and economics. They were the language of power, the grammar of wealth. My professors quickly recognized I wasn't like the others. I arrived early, stayed late, asked questions that showed I'd researched far beyond the assigned material. I challenged assumptions. I had an intuitive understanding of market forces. Dr. Richard Chen, a professor who'd built and sold 2 successful companies, took a special interest. He saw in me the hunger of a true entrepreneur. He mentored me, lending me books, introducing me to concepts like venture capital and algorithmic trading. He also taught me something equally important. In high finance, perception mattered as much as reality. The wealthy dressed, spoke, carried themselves in particular ways. He taught me which forks to use, how to tie a Windsor knot, how to make small talk about opera and wine. I absorbed it all. Code switching wasn't betrayal, it was strategy. I spent hours in the library, mimicking body language, training myself to project confidence, even when I felt like an imposter. I bought one good suit from a thrift store, had it tailored perfectly. Every detail mattered. Every choice was strategic. The world judged you in 7 seconds, and I couldn't afford to waste a single one. During my sophomore year, I made my first real investment. I'd saved $800. Most people would have spent it on necessities. I saw opportunity. I'd been tracking a small pharmaceutical company developing a rare disease treatment. Their stock was $3 a share. Most analysts ignored it. But my research suggested approval was coming, and an acquisition would follow. I invested my entire $800, buying 266 shares. Then I waited. 6 months later, the FDA approved the treatment. 2 weeks after that, a major pharma company announced an acquisition at $41 a share. I sold for a profit of over $10,000. $800 into $10,000. It felt like infinite wealth. I could have spent it. A car, new clothes, easing the pressure of my jobs. Instead, I reinvested every penny. Split it across 3 other meticulously researched opportunities. Over the next 2 years, I repeated the pattern. Careful, calculated bets, not gambling. Some failed, but more succeeded. My portfolio grew steadily. I developed an almost supernatural ability to identify undervalued companies. By senior year, my portfolio was over $200,000. A sum that would have seemed impossible to the child counting pennies. But I told no one. Not classmates, not even professors. Money changed how people perceived you, and I wasn't ready for that change. I still lived in the cheapest dorm, wore my one good suit, worked my part-time jobs, even though I didn't need them financially. They kept me grounded, connected to reality. Every week, I sent money home to my mom. Never so much she'd ask questions, but enough to ease her life, insure her medications, maybe a rare day off. Dr. Chen noticed my increasing sophistication. In our final mentoring session, he asked how much I'd accumulated. I hesitated, then told him the truth. His eyebrows rose in surprise, then respect. He told me I had a gift. A rare combination of analytical intelligence and psychological discipline. He said most people who made money young inflated their lifestyles. But true power came from the gap between what you had and what people thought you had. Build your empire in silence. Reveal your strength only when it served a strategic purpose. The wealthiest, most powerful people were often those whose names appeared in no magazines. Invisibility was its own kind of armor. I graduated summa cum laude with a finance degree. Job offers from investment banks poured in, 60, 70,000 a year, plus bonuses. More money than my mom made in 5 years of backbreaking labor. I turned them all down. My career counselor thought I was insane. I had no intention of building someone else's empire. I had learned enough, accumulated enough capital to begin my own path. Traditional finance would only slow me down. I had bigger plans. After graduation, I rented a tiny studio apartment. My operations center, a used desk, 3 monitors from a going-out-of-business sale, and a dedication to outworking everyone. I registered an investment company under a generic name, creating legal layers to hide my identity. I didn't want my youth or background to bias perceptions. I wanted my investments to speak for themselves, evaluated purely on merit. This anonymity became the defining characteristic of my approach. The first 5 years after college were the hardest, most transformative of my life. 18-hour days. Analyzing companies, markets, economic trends. Eating instant noodles so I could reinvest every spare dollar. I developed a unique strategy. While others chased hot stocks, I found fundamentally solid companies temporarily undervalued due to market overreaction. Businesses with strong management, competitive advantages, growth potential the market hadn't recognized yet. Not quick flips. Companies I could hold for years, decades. My breakthrough came when I was 25, though no one else knew it. I'd been tracking Harrison Industries for a year. A mid-sized manufacturing and tech company, founded by Theodore Harrison, 30 years earlier. Successful, but not spectacular. Profitable, but not exciting. The kind of solid business flashy investors ignored. But I saw something others missed. Harrison Industries was at the intersection of several emerging trends. Their manufacturing capabilities, their tech patents, would become incredibly valuable. The company was dramatically undervalued because Theodore's conservative management made them seem boring. I began accumulating shares slowly, carefully, through my anonymous investment vehicle. Buying small amounts so as not to trigger attention. I bought when others sold in frustration. I bought during market downturns. I bought whenever I could at reasonable prices, steadily building a position. Within 3 years, I had nearly all my capital invested in Harrison Industries. Millions of shares through complex structures, keeping my identity hidden. I owned approximately 15% of the company. I was by far the largest single shareholder. Larger even than Theodore Harrison himself, who had gradually sold down his stake over the years to fund his lifestyle. But I didn't stop there. I continued studying the company, submitting anonymous analyses and strategic recommendations through my firm. As a major shareholder, I had voting rights, but I exercised those votes through layers of proxies. I voted for board members who understood long-term value creation. I voted for strategic initiatives that would strengthen the company, even if they temporarily reduced margins. I voted against executive compensation that rewarded short-term stock price manipulation. Slowly, without anyone knowing who was pulling the strings, I shaped Harrison Industries into the company I believed it could become. The results spoke for themselves. Over the next few years, Harrison Industries' stock price began a steady climb. The market finally recognized what I had seen all along. The company's value tripled, then quadrupled. It grew beyond even my optimistic projections. By the time I was 30, my stake in Harrison Industries was worth approximately $10 billion. One of the wealthiest individuals in the country. Though absolutely no one, except my lawyers and accountants, knew my real identity. To the public, the media, even the company's own executives, the major shareholder was just a bland corporate name. An anonymous investment vehicle. I maintained my simple life with a discipline that bordered on obsessive. Still lived in a modest apartment. Drove a used car. Bought clothes from mid-range stores. I sent money to my mom, who had finally retired, but only told her my investments were doing well. No yachts, no private jets. My wealth wasn't about consumption. It was about security. About power. About never being helpless again. About protecting everyone I loved, and shaping the world according to my vision of what was right and fair. Material possessions meant nothing beyond basic comfort. What mattered were the numbers in my accounts, growing larger, representing not money, but possibility. During this period, I lived an oddly solitary existence. I dated occasionally, but nothing serious. How do you build intimacy while maintaining such walls around the core truth of your identity? Most women assumed I was struggling financially, a smart guy who hadn't quite figured out how to turn his intelligence into prosperity. I never corrected them. I told myself I was waiting for the right person, someone who'd love me for me, not what I had. But the truth was more complicated. My secret had become so central to my identity. I no longer knew where the performance ended and the real Daniel began. Then, on a completely ordinary Tuesday afternoon, in a completely ordinary coffee shop, my carefully constructed, solitary life collided with destiny. In the form of Emma Harrison. And nothing would ever be the same again. Emma walked in with a natural elegance that had nothing to do with money. She moved with quiet confidence, no arrogance. I noticed her immediately, not just because she was beautiful, but because of the way she treated the young barista who'd messed up her order. Most people would complain. Emma just smiled, said it was fine, whatever they made would be perfect. That genuine kindness caught my attention in a way calculated charm never could. She sat at the table next to mine, pulled out a laptop covered in charity stickers, and became absorbed in her work. I found myself stealing glances, watching her smile at something on her screen, or frown in concentration. When her phone rang, she stepped outside, leaving her laptop behind, completely trusting. On impulse, I bought 2 coffees. When she returned, I offered her one, saying I'd accidentally ordered an extra. Emma looked at me with warm, discerning eyes, assessed me for a moment, then accepted with a smile that transformed her entire face. We fell into conversation with the easy naturalness of people who somehow already know they're supposed to meet. She asked what I did, and I gave my standard vague answer, financial consulting. Technically true, but it concealed far more than it revealed. She worked for a nonprofit focused on educational equity, helping low-income students. As she described her work, her passion was evident. I found myself sharing more than I usually did, my own childhood, my mother's struggles, the scholarship that changed my life. Emma listened with complete attention, asking thoughtful questions, treating my story not as something to pity, but as something valuable and real. She didn't flinch when I mentioned growing up poor. In a world that measured people by bank accounts, Emma measured people by character, kindness, and what they contributed beyond themselves. We talked until the coffee shop closed. When we finally left, I had her phone number, a date planned, and a feeling in my chest I couldn't quite name, but knew was significant. Our first date stretched to 4 hours, our second to 6. By our third, I understood with crystal clarity that Emma Harrison wasn't just someone I enjoyed spending time with. She was someone who made me want to be more honest, more open, more fully myself. She had a way of seeing through surfaces. I wanted to tell her everything, open up my entire life. But fear held me back. Fear that revealing my wealth would change how she looked at me, introduced doubt about whether she loved me or my money. It wasn't until our 8th or 9th date, when Emma offhandedly mentioned her last name in the context of a story about her father, that I made the connection. Emma Harrison. Harrison, as in Harrison Industries. As in Theodore Harrison, the founder and CEO whose company I owned $10 billion worth of shares in. The woman I was falling in love with was the daughter of the man whose business empire I secretly controlled. The universe, it seemed, had a dark sense of humor. It was a situation so absurdly complicated it would be comical if it weren't so terrifying. My mind raced. Was this a setup? Had Emma known all along? No, that was impossible. She had no reason to connect a man living simply to the anonymous investor who held the largest stake in her father's company. No one made that connection, because the connections were deliberately untraceable. I knew I should tell her. At minimum, that I knew who her father was. But every time I tried to form the words, fear choked off the air. Fear that telling her would end what we were building. Fear she'd think I'd approached her deliberately, that our relationship was built on manipulation. Fear that the secret I'd protected for so long would leak out and destroy everything. So I said nothing. I told myself I'd find the right moment. Later turned into weeks, then months. The secret grew heavier with each passing day. 6 months in, Emma took me to meet her parents. My first glimpse of Theodore Harrison in person was a shock. He was exactly as I'd imagined from years of reading shareholder letters, tall, distinguished, with silver hair and a presence that filled rooms. But there was something else. A coldness in his eyes, a cruelty around his mouth. He saw people as tools. Emma's mother, Patricia, was different. Softer, warmer, but also faded. As if living with Theodore had erased parts of her personality. Their mansion looked like it belonged in a magazine. Marble and glass, expensive art. Dinner that first night was excruciating. Theodore barely acknowledged my existence. He spent the meal talking about business and politics, his own achievements, occasionally pausing to ask me questions clearly designed to highlight the gulf between us. What did Daniel's father do? Oh, absent. How unfortunate. State school? Perfectly adequate for some. What exactly did financial consulting entail? His tone made it clear he considered my vague job description evidence of unemployment dressed up with fancy words. Emma tried to steer the conversation, but Theodore dominated. Patricia simply smiled her faded smile, and said nothing that might displease him. As the evening progressed, a strange cognitive dissonance settled over me. This man, treating me with barely concealed contempt, making it abundantly clear I wasn't good enough for his daughter, had no idea I controlled his company's future with a single vote. Theodore Harrison, who saw a poor boy playing above his station, was, in reality, dependent on my continued support for every major strategic decision. The irony was so profound it almost made me laugh. But I maintained my calm exterior, playing the role of the humble boyfriend. It stung more than I wanted to admit, awakening old wounds from childhood. After that dinner, Emma apologized profusely. "He's old-fashioned," she said. "Protective. He never thinks anyone is good enough for me." She assured me his opinion didn't matter. She loved me for who I was. I told her it was fine, I understood. But inside, my mind churned. Tell her? Worse or better? Would she believe my love was real? Would Theodore leverage the information? Too many variables, too high the risks. And so, I remained silent. Our relationship deepened over the next year, growing into a love that felt both inevitable and miraculous. Emma never cared about money. She loved that I was thoughtful, kind, intelligent. That I volunteered at the same nonprofit, helping low-income students understand finance. She loved that I remembered small details about her day, treated her like a partner, not a prize. When I proposed, after 18 months, with my grandmother's simple gold band, Emma said yes, tears streaming down her face. She said it was the most meaningful ring anyone could have given her. We planned a small wedding. It suited me perfectly. It disappointed Emma's parents enormously. Theodore expected a grand society affair. But Emma insisted on something intimate. 50 guests, a garden venue. It was one of the happiest days of my life, despite Theodore's obvious displeasure radiating from the front row. Emma looked at me during our vows with such complete trust and love. Guilt crashed over me in waves. Guilt that I was still hiding such a fundamental truth. Guilt that our marriage was beginning with a secret woven into its foundation like a crack in bedrock, waiting to spread. We moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment. Emma never questioned why I seemed content with our simple lifestyle. She had grown up with wealth and seen how it corrupted, how her father's obsession had made him mean. Emma genuinely preferred our quiet life. But Theodore became an increasing source of tension. Not because Emma sided with him, but because his disapproval weighed on her. At every family gathering, he made pointed comments about my lack of ambition. About how Emma could have married any number of successful young men from good families. He called me the charity case. But he thought I was out of earshot. But I heard it. And rage burned through me like acid. Emma would cry after these encounters, frustrated that her father couldn't just be happy for her. There were moments I almost told her. The words gathered on my tongue. But doubt pulled me back. What if it made things worse? What if Emma felt betrayed? What if Theodore twisted it? The variables were too many, the risks too high. So I continued my silence, even as the weight grew heavier. 2 years into our marriage, Harrison Industries faced a crisis. A major product line failed, defects, recalls, reputation damage. The stock plummeted 40%. Theodore's leadership came under fire. Board meetings became battlegrounds. My $10 billion stake temporarily lost $4 billion in value on paper. But I wasn't concerned about short-term fluctuations. My analysis told me the crisis was serious but manageable. Theodore's leadership, despite its flaws, was still the best option for recovery. Through my anonymous investment vehicle, I voted to retain Theodore as CEO and supported the recovery plan. My votes were decisive. My 15% stake gave me more weight than any other shareholder. The motions passed because of my support. Theodore never knew how close he came to losing his position. Never knew that the anonymous investor he occasionally cursed in private, the one wielding so much control, had just saved his career. The irony twisted in my stomach every time I had to sit through another family dinner and listen to him complain about how the board didn't appreciate him. I sat silently, nodded politely, while thinking, if he knew the truth, knew that the largest shareholder was the son-in-law he treated with such contempt, the revelation might literally kill him from shock and rage. There was dark satisfaction in that thought, but also sadness. I took no joy in this elaborate deception. Emma noticed my stress. Asked if something was wrong. I wanted to tell her everything. But the fear remained. I told her partial truths, market conditions, underperforming investments, concern for her father's company. She thanked me for caring. "Theodore will be fine," she said. "He always lands on his feet." She told me she was grateful I was nothing like him, that my kindness and humility were what she loved most about me. Her words were meant as comfort, but they cut like knives. Because I knew my humility was at least partly performance. That I was hiding a kind of power and wealth that made me more like Theodore than she realized. 3.5 years into our marriage. On an ordinary Wednesday, Emma came home with news that made my heart sink. Her mom, Patricia, had called. Dinner this weekend. Theodore's 65th birthday. An intimate family dinner, just the four of us. Emma was excited. She hoped, maybe, in a smaller setting, her father might finally warm to me. She asked me to please make an effort, maybe dress up, talk about my work in a way that might impress Theodore. I agreed. Dread settled over me like a heavy blanket. In the days leading up to dinner, I thought obsessively about the situation I'd created. For years, this double life. The gap between who everyone thought I was, and who I actually was. It had grown into a chasm so wide I no longer knew how to bridge it. I thought about simply telling Emma before dinner, but I couldn't find the words. I thought about canceling, claiming illness. But that would only postpone the inevitable and hurt Emma. I thought about so many scenarios, but none offered an escape route that didn't involve some kind of destruction. Then, an idea began forming. Dark, manipulative, but strangely compelling. What if I went to this dinner and played my role perfectly? Played the poor, struggling son-in-law Theodore believed me to be, and simply observed? What if I tested Theodore's character? Tested whether this man, who controlled his daughter's love and whose respect Emma desperately craved, was capable of basic human decency. I'd built my fortune on understanding people's true motivations. Why not apply that same analytical lens to my father-in-law? It was manipulative, yes. But I told myself it was justified. I needed to know the truth about the man whose company I controlled, and whose daughter I loved. The night of the dinner arrived with the weight of inevitability. Emma, in a simple but elegant dress, kept adjusting my tie. She wanted everything to be perfect. I wore my one good suit. The same one I'd worn to important occasions for years. Properly maintained, but clearly not expensive. I looked in the mirror. I saw a man who appeared exactly as Theodore expected, moderately successful, but nothing special. Certainly not wealthy. Certainly not powerful. Just an ordinary person who happened to have married extraordinarily well. The reflection staring back was both true and false. Both honest and the most elaborate lie. I wondered, not for the first time, if I'd lost myself completely in this performance. We arrived at the mansion exactly on time. Patricia opened the door with a faded smile. The house was decorated for the birthday. Elegant flower arrangements, fine china. Everything coordinated and perfect, and yet, utterly without personality or warmth. Theodore appeared from his study, expensive suit, an expression that made it clear this dinner was an obligation. He shook my hand with a grip designed to be slightly too firm. A small dominance display. I recognized it. Ignored it. Dinner began with the stilted conversation that characterized all our family gatherings. Patricia asked safe questions. Theodore periodically inserted comments about business or politics without inviting dialogue. I played my part perfectly, speaking only when addressed, offering bland, agreeable responses. The kind of careful deference people without power showed to people with it. Emma tried valiantly to create some warmth, talking about a recent vacation we'd taken to a state park. Camping, hiking. Simple pleasures that cost almost nothing. Theodore's face twisted with something that might have been disgust or pity. He made a comment about different standards of comfort. As dinner progressed, I felt the familiar anger building inside me. The same anger I'd felt as a child when teachers dismissed me, or store clerks followed me, assuming I was shoplifting. Theodore's condescension wasn't loud or obvious. It was delivered in subtle ways that allowed plausible deniability. But it was absolutely present in every glance, every tone. He questioned my financial consulting business with skepticism, as if I was lying. He made comparisons between Emma's childhood and the modest life she now lived, sighing about all the things she had given up, implying I dragged her down. Patricia said nothing, just refilled wine glasses, offered more food. Then, as we finished the main course and Patricia brought out the birthday cake, Theodore did something that would change everything. He reached into his jacket pocket. Pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the polished mahogany table directly in front of me. A gesture so deliberate, it couldn't be mistaken as casual. The envelope was thick. When I looked at Theodore, I saw an expression that made my blood run cold. Contempt mixed with satisfaction. The look of someone about to reveal their true nature. To dispense with pretense and say the cruel, quiet part out loud. Emma looked confused. "What is this about?" she asked, glancing between her father and the envelope. Theodore ignored her. His eyes locked on mine. "Open it," he said. "Consider it a birthday gift to myself." My hands remained steady as I reached for it. My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities. Some part of me wondered if he'd discovered my identity. But that seemed impossibly unlikely. Emma asked again. Theodore just smiled that cruel smile. "Go ahead," he urged. I broke the seal. Pulled out the contents. First, a check made out to me personally for $500,000. Beneath that, a legal document, several pages long. My eyes scanned it quickly. Years of analyzing complex business agreements allowed me to parse the legal language efficiently. It was a contract. A separation agreement. Offering me $500,000 to divorce Emma and disappear from her life permanently. The terms were brutal. I was to sign away all rights to any future contact, move at least 500 miles away, never discuss the marriage or the Harrison family publicly. Essentially erase myself. Failure to comply would mean returning the money plus penalties. It was professionally prepared, drafted by expensive lawyers. Every contingency considered. Every loophole closed. A strange calm settled over me. The same coldness I experienced when analyzing companies. It allowed me to think clearly, even as rage burned underneath. I looked up. Theodore watched me with undisguised satisfaction. Expecting shock, anger, or grateful acceptance. Emma had gone very still beside me. Her face pale. When she reached for the document, I handed it to her without a word. She read it, her hands beginning to shake. When she finished, she turned to her father with an expression I'd never seen her wear. Hurt and fury and complete betrayal. Before Emma could speak, Theodore launched into a speech he'd clearly prepared. His voice taking on that sickeningly reasonable tone of someone explaining obvious facts to a stubborn child. He tried to be patient, he said. Tried to hope this marriage would run its natural course. But it was clear I was determined to cling to the lifestyle Emma provided. $500,000 was more money than I'd see in 10 lifetimes. It was a generous offer. Emma deserved a partner from their world. Someone with the right background, the right connections. Theodore looked at me with supreme confidence, assuming complete victory. He assumed money would do what social pressure had failed to do. He assumed every person had a price. And $500,000 would certainly be enough for someone like Daniel. Emma would understand, eventually. She'd thank him. As Theodore spoke, Patricia stared at her plate. Saying nothing. Complicit in her silence. Emma found her voice then. It came out as a controlled scream. Fury barely contained. She told her father he was absolutely out of his mind. She loved me. She chose me freely. His money and opinions meant nothing compared to the life she'd built with her husband. Theodore was cruel, controlling. His obsession with status had turned him into someone she barely recognized. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Grabbed my hand. We're leaving, she said. I rose with her. Still calm. Still cold. And that was when I made the decision that would detonate my secret like a nuclear bomb in the center of their lives. Instead of leaving, I gently squeezed Emma's hand. Wait, I said. Just one moment. I turned to Theodore. A smile that didn't reach my eyes. Theodore, I asked, do you know who your largest shareholder is? Who holds 15% of Harrison Industries, and wields more voting power than anyone else? Including you? He looked confused, irritated. Of course I know. It's some investment firm, generic name. Mostly supportive, but their anonymity is irritating. Their influence is a constant frustration. He said it as if I were an idiot for asking. As if everyone knew. As if it had no relevance. My smile widened. It sharpened. The anonymous investor you're referring to, I said. The one who saved your position during the crisis 2 years ago. The one who voted for every major strategic initiative. The one who controls $10 billion worth of Harrison Industries stock, is sitting right here at this dinner table. Theodore's face went blank. Confusion replacing contempt. I don't understand what you're implying, he said. Emma looked at me, equally confused. What are you talking about? She whispered. I reached into my own jacket pocket. Pulled out my phone. The financial application that tracked my portfolio. The numbers I looked at every day, but never showed anyone. I turned the phone around so both Theodore and Emma could see the screen. The current value of my Harrison Industries holdings. A number that started with a 1 and had 10 digits, following it. The shares held through the investment vehicle Theodore had cursed and relied upon in equal measure, without ever knowing who controlled it. I showed them the historical records of my votes on major board decisions. The pattern immediately recognizable to Theodore as the anonymous investors. I showed them documentation that proved, beyond any doubt, that Daniel Morgan, the poor, struggling son-in-law Theodore had just offered $500,000 to disappear, was in fact the single most powerful shareholder in Theodore's company. And one of the wealthiest men in the entire country. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I heard Patricia's sharp intake of breath. I heard the wine glass Theodore had been holding hit the table as his hand went slack. Emma stared at the phone screen as though it showed something impossible. Her mouth slightly open, eyes wide. Theodore's face went from blank to red. Blood vessels stood out on his forehead as his blood pressure spiked. He looked like a man who had just seen his entire understanding of reality collapse like a house built on sand. Theodore's voice, when he finally found it, was strangled. "Is this some kind of joke? What fraud are you trying to perpetrate?" I responded calmly. "No joke. No fraud. Every document is genuine. If you want verification, I can provide contacts for the legal team that manages my investments." I explained I'd been accumulating shares since before I met Emma. Our relationship had nothing to do with my investment strategy. I maintained anonymity for cleaner decision-making, without personal conflicts complicating business judgments. Emma's voice cut through the room like a knife. "Daniel, is this real? Have you really been secretly wealthy all this time? Was everything about our life a lie?" The hurt in her voice was so raw it physically pained me. I turned to her, trying to explain. "The money is real, Emma. But our relationship isn't built on lies. I fell in love with you genuinely. Every moment we shared was authentic." I tried to explain that my simple lifestyle was not a performance for her benefit, but how I actually chose to live. That wealth had never changed who I was fundamentally. I'd wanted to tell her so many times, but the longer I waited, the harder it became. Until the secret felt like a wall I didn't know how to climb over. Emma was crying now, tears streaming. She asked how I could hide something so fundamental. How I could watch her worry about money, make budgets, try to save for our future, when I was secretly a billionaire. Guilt crashed over me in waves. She was right. Even though we'd never struggled, even though I'd always made sure we were comfortable, I had let her live with completely unnecessary concerns. I tried to explain that I never wanted money to define our relationship. That I'd seen how wealth corrupted, destroyed genuine connections. That I wanted her to love me for myself. Even as I said the words, they sounded like excuses. Justifications for what was ultimately a betrayal of trust. Theodore had recovered some composure. His businessman's instincts overriding his shock. "Did you pursue Emma deliberately?" he asked. "Was this entire relationship engineered to gain leverage over Harrison Industries?" I met his eyes steadily. "Absolutely not. I had no idea who Emma was when we met. Learning her last name weeks into our relationship was as shocking to me as this revelation is to you now. I'd invested in Harrison Industries purely on business fundamentals. Falling in love with Emma was the best thing that ever happened to me, and also the most complicating factor." Patricia spoke for the first time, her voice small, confused. "Why would someone with $10 billion live in a small apartment and drive an old car?" I turned to her. Tried to explain something I knew people who'd never been poor could never fully understand. Growing up with nothing taught me that material possessions don't create happiness or security. The people with the biggest houses often have the emptiest lives. I'd watched my mother work herself to death. I never wanted to confuse luxury with necessity. My simple lifestyle wasn't deprivation, but liberation. Freedom from the endless cycle of consumption and status. Theodore's mind was working through implications, calculations. I could see it in his eyes. When he spoke again, his tone shifted. From shock to something more calculating. "If you truly control 15% of Harrison Industries, we need to discuss the future direction of the company." He was already trying to turn it to his advantage. I felt disgust rise in my throat. This was exactly what I'd feared. Emma stood up abruptly, pushing her chair back so hard it crashed to the floor. "I can't be here anymore." Couldn't listen to her father try to turn her husband's secret wealth into a business opportunity. Couldn't process everything. She needed air. Needed space. Needed time. She walked towards the door, then paused. Looked back at me. Her eyes held a mixture of love, betrayal, and a confusion so profound it seemed to fragment her entirely. "Are there other secrets?" she asked. "Other fundamental truths about your life you've never shared? Do I even know you at all, or have I been living with a stranger wearing a familiar face?" I had no answer that would satisfy her. Because the truth was, I didn't know myself. Didn't know where my authentic self ended and my protective performance began. Emma didn't wait. She walked out of the dining room, through the foyer, out the front door into the night. I started to follow her. Theodore's voice stopped me, sharp and commanding. "We are not finished talking." I turned back to my father-in-law. My voice was cold. "We are absolutely finished for tonight. You can take your separation agreement and your $500,000 bribe and use it as kindling." I told him he just tried to buy off a man worth $10 billion with money that was essentially pocket change. Theodore had revealed exactly who he was tonight. Someone who valued control and status over his own daughter's happiness. Someone whose first instinct was to calculate advantage, rather than apologize for years of contempt. He was everything I had feared wealthy people were. I said that I had voted to keep him as CEO out of business judgment. But if his personal behavior continued to hurt Emma, I would not hesitate to use my influence to make changes at the board level. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Theodore's face went red again, rage warring with fear. He understood. His position was suddenly far more precarious than he'd ever imagined. I didn't wait for a response. I just turned and followed Emma out into the night. I found Emma in our car, in the circular driveway of the Harrison mansion. Her face was illuminated by the dashboard lights, wet with tears. I got into the passenger seat quietly. Sat with her in the heavy silence. She didn't look at me. Just stared straight ahead through the windshield, at the mansion where she'd learned that love was conditional. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, broken. It made my chest ache. "I don't know what to feel," she whispered. "Angry at you for lying, or relieved we don't have to worry about money. Or hurt that you didn't trust me." She'd spent 3.5 years thinking she knew me. Now she was discovering that huge parts of my identity had been hidden. "Explain," she said. "From the beginning. Tell me the whole story. Everything. Even the parts that make you look bad." So I told her. I told her about counting pennies. My mother's exhaustion, my father's abandonment. Discovering the stock market. Teaching myself to invest with a desperation that came from knowing poverty could kill. My first investment, how it grew. How I found undervalued companies. I told her about Harrison Industries, how I'd identified it years before meeting her. How I'd steadily accumulated shares through anonymous vehicles. I told her about the coffee shop, being drawn to her kindness. Learning her last name and the impossible complication it created. All the times I'd almost told her, the words gathering, only to be swallowed back down by fear. Fear that she would think I'd manipulated her. Fear that revealing my wealth would change our relationship. Fear that she would question my love. I told her that maintaining the secret had become harder every day. That watching her father treat me with contempt while knowing I controlled his company had been both satisfying and torturous. I told her my simple lifestyle was genuine, not an act. That the money in my accounts was about security and power, not consumption. I told her loving her was the truest, best thing in my life. And that I was terribly sorry I'd hidden something so fundamental. I had no good excuse, except fear and shame, and not knowing how to fix something that had gotten too big to easily correct. Emma listened without interrupting, tears still sliding down her face. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long time. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. The question that cut to the heart of whether our marriage could survive. Was our entire life together a performance on your part? Did the man I thought I knew even exist, or was it all carefully constructed theater? I reached for her hand. She let me take it. The smallest hint of hope. "My core self," I said, "has always been genuine. My values, my beliefs, the way I treat people, those aren't performances. They're reflections of who I am. The performance was only in hiding the money. In maintaining the appearance of moderate success, rather than extreme wealth. But everything else, my love for you, my kindness, my interests, my personality, was completely real." I told her I understood if she needed time, if she needed space. But I wanted her to know my love was absolutely authentic. Emma finally looked at me. Really looked at me. Searching my face for signs of deception. I let her look. Hiding nothing. Letting her see all the fear and hope and desperate love that churned inside me. She said she believed I loved her. She could see the truth of that in my eyes. But that belief didn't make the betrayal hurt less, or erase the fact that I had made a choice, every day for years, to keep lying to her by omission. She said she needed time to think. Needed to sort through her feelings without me there trying to explain, or justify. She asked me to stay somewhere else for a while. A week or two. While she figured out what she wanted their marriage to look like. My heart sank. But I understood. I knew I had no right to demand anything. I agreed. I'd get a hotel room. She could contact me when she was ready. "Is there anything I can do?" I asked. "Anything you need from me?" Emma said the only thing she needed was the truth, from now on. Complete truth. Without editing or strategic omissions. If we were going to rebuild trust, she needed to know I was capable of being fully honest. Even when it was uncomfortable, or risky. I moved out that night, throwing some clothes in a bag while Emma sat silently on the couch. I went to a decent hotel. Not ostentatious, but comfortable. I checked in under my real name. For the first time in my life, without worrying about maintaining my cover. The secret was out now, at least with the people who mattered most. There was strange relief in that, even though the revelation had potentially destroyed my marriage. I lay on the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight that had pressed on me for 7 years finally lift. Replaced by a different weight, the weight of consequences and uncertainty. Over the next several days, my life experienced an earthquake. Word spread through business circles. The mysterious anonymous investor in Harrison Industries had been revealed. Daniel Morgan was not a struggling consultant, but a billionaire who had been hiding in plain sight. Financial journalists started investigating. Requests for interviews flooded my email. Venture capitalists, investment firms, charities. Suddenly, everyone wanted access to Daniel Morgan. The attention was overwhelming, invasive. Exactly what I had spent years trying to avoid. Confirmation that my fears about revelation had been well-founded. While I dealt with the sudden exposure, Theodore Harrison was experiencing his own reckoning. The morning after the disastrous birthday dinner, he arrived at his office to find an email from my legal team, requesting an emergency board meeting to discuss governance and leadership issues. The implied threat was clear. Theodore understood. His attempt to buy me off had spectacularly backfired, threatening his control of the company. He spent the morning making frantic calls, trying to shore up support. But board members expressed surprise that he'd allowed his relationship with his largest shareholder to deteriorate so badly. The board meeting took place 3 days later. I attended in person for the first time. My appearance shocked the assembled executives. Theodore watched with barely concealed fury as people who never given me a second thought now treated me with the deference and respect that money commanded. I presented a detailed analysis of Harrison Industries' strategic position, proposing initiatives to strengthen competitive advantages. My proposals were sophisticated, well-reasoned. Then I addressed the elephant in the room with directness. As the company's largest shareholder, I had an obligation to ensure leadership served all stakeholders, not personal ego or family dynasty. Theodore had built an impressive company, but recent events raised questions about whether personal judgment might be affecting professional decisions. I didn't explicitly mention the separation agreement or the bribe. I didn't need to. Rumors had spread. I said I wasn't calling for his immediate removal, but putting on record that continued support was contingent on a demonstrated commitment to shareholder value over personal interests. The message couldn't have been clearer. Theodore was on notice. His position depended on my continued goodwill. Everyone in that room understood. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Theodore tried to respond, to defend himself. But his words came out defensive and weak. He'd spent years being the most powerful person in every room. Now, he was discovering what it felt like to be on the other side. The meeting ended with Theodore technically still CEO, but practically diminished. He left the conference room looking older and smaller than when he entered. Patricia called me that evening, her voice shaking, begging me not to destroy her husband out of revenge. I responded more gently than she probably deserved, given her complicity. I had no interest in revenge. But I wouldn't allow personal animosity to interfere with my responsibility to all shareholders. If Theodore could lead the company effectively while treating his family with basic decency, I would support him completely. But if he continued to prioritize control over performance, I would exercise my rights as majority shareholder. The choice was entirely Theodore's. Meanwhile, Emma was experiencing her own complicated reactions. Friends and family reached out. She found herself having to explain things she was still processing. Some congratulated her on marrying so well, as if my money was the accomplishment. Those comments made her angry. She had loved me believing I had none. Other people suggested I'd manipulated her. Those comments made her defensive, even though she was still hurt by my deception. Emma spent hours thinking about our relationship, reviewing memories, trying to separate what was real from what was performance. All the times I volunteered at the nonprofit, helping students with genuine passion. How I treated service workers with kindness. Our quiet evenings, our conversations. Those moments felt authentic. And gradually, Emma began to understand that my hiding my wealth didn't mean I'd been hiding my character. But she was still angry, still hurt. The pain of betrayal. She had trusted me completely. And discovering such a fundamental truth had been hidden made her question everything else. How could she trust me going forward? After 10 days of separation, Emma called. Asked me to meet her at the coffee shop where we'd first met. I arrived early, anxious. Drinking terrible coffee, watching the door. When Emma walked in, she looked tired and sad, but also somehow more centered. As though she'd worked through something difficult and come out the other side. We sat at the same table. Emma told me what she'd decided. She still loved me. Going through our history, thinking about who I really was, had confirmed the man she fell in love with was genuine. Even if parts of his life were hidden. She believed my explanation that the secrecy was about fear rather than manipulation. She could understand that fear, even if she didn't agree with how I'd handled it. But for our marriage to continue, things had to change fundamentally. No more secrets. No more strategic omissions. No more managing her perception of reality. She needed complete transparency. About everything. Her finances, my business dealings, any decisions that might affect our lives. She needed to be a true partner. I agreed immediately. Completely. Relief flooded through me so intensely I felt dizzy. I promised no more secrets. I would tell her everything. I would include her in all major decisions. I would set up meetings with my lawyers and accountants so she could understand the full scope of my holdings. If she wanted to change our lifestyle, move to a nicer place, I'd be open to that conversation. Emma smiled slightly. She liked our apartment. Our simple life. My money didn't change what made her happy. But knowing about it, and having a say in how it was used, mattered tremendously. We talked for hours that afternoon. Working through details, feelings, plans for rebuilding trust. Emma told me about her conversations with her parents. Her mother had called, crying, apologizing. Her father had sent a stiff, formal email, the closest Theodore Harrison would ever come to admitting he was wrong. She had told her father that my wealth didn't vindicate his cruelty. That treating people badly because you thought they were poor revealed character flaws he needed to address. She made it clear her marriage was her choice, her priority. Their relationship going forward would depend on them treating me with respect. I told her about the board meeting. My confrontation with Theodore. The sudden, unwanted attention from the media. I was thinking about going public with my story, on my own terms. One comprehensive interview. Emma thought that was smart. Taking control of the narrative. She offered to be there for the interview, to show our marriage had survived. I accepted gratefully. We left the coffee shop together that afternoon, walking back to our apartment hand in hand. Even though there were still difficult conversations ahead, and trust to rebuild, both of us felt like we had turned a corner. The secret that had defined my life for so long was finally out in the open. And while the revelation had been painful and messy, it had also created the possibility of real intimacy in ways that were impossible when I was constantly guarding such a fundamental truth. Emma moved back into our apartment that night. We began the slow work of rebuilding our marriage on a foundation of complete honesty. In the weeks following our reconciliation, Emma and I began having conversations we'd never been able to have before. Conversations about what we wanted our life to look like, now that the truth was no longer hidden. I arranged for Emma to meet with my financial advisors and lawyers, walking her through my entire portfolio. She was overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it, the complexity. She understood, in a new way, why I'd kept it secret. How time-consuming and intricate the management was. It was essentially a full-time job. We discussed changing our lifestyle. Emma surprised me. She wanted to keep things mostly the same. She liked our apartment, our neighborhood, the rhythm of our daily life. The money was abstractly comforting, knowing we'd never struggle. But she didn't want the kind of wealthy lifestyle her parents lived. The constant performance, the status competition. I felt immense relief. It confirmed my instinct about who Emma was. She truly didn't care about material displays of wealth. But we did make some changes. Particularly in how we used my wealth to make a difference. Emma had always been passionate about educational equity. Now, we could fund programs and scholarships at a level that would meaningfully change lives. We established a foundation. Focused on helping low-income students access higher education. Providing not just tuition, but comprehensive support, mentoring, job connections, emergency funds. I threw myself into this philanthropic work with the same intensity one brought to building my fortune. We also set up a trust for my mom, ensuring Maria would never have to worry about money again. I went to visit her, told her the truth about my wealth. Her face cycled through shock, disbelief, and finally tears. She understood that her son had accomplished everything he promised when he was a child studying stock prices by flashlight. She didn't want his money. But I explained gently that I needed her to be secure. That knowing she was cared for allowed me to breathe freely in ways I hadn't been able to before. Maria finally accepted. I bought her a modest, comfortable house in a safe neighborhood. The media attention around my story was intense, but brief, as I had hoped. I did one comprehensive interview with a respected business journalist. Told my story, from childhood poverty to building my fortune anonymously. The article portrayed me sympathetically. While there were critics, the general response was positive. Then, as media attention does, it moved on. I was able to return to relative obscurity. Theodore Harrison's response to the changed power dynamic was grudging and slow, but it did eventually come. He'd spent weeks alternating between rage and fear. But as weeks passed, and I took no hostile action beyond the warning at the board meeting, Theodore began to understand I had no interest in revenge. Pride made it difficult for him to change. But survival instinct eventually overrode pride. Theodore called. Asked to meet. Just the two of us. At a quiet restaurant. I agreed. What he got was something in between an attack and an apology. A conversation where he tried to justify his actions, while also acknowledging he had misjudged me spectacularly. He said he had only wanted to protect his daughter. He'd seen what he thought was a poor young man taking advantage of Emma, and his instinct had been to intervene. The separation agreement had been meant as a test. And he had gotten that test catastrophically wrong. I listened without interrupting, then responded with directness. His claimed protective instinct was really just classism. Prejudice against people from poverty. An assumption that wealth equaled worth. He had treated me with contempt for years, never bothering to get to know me, or give me credit for making Emma genuinely happy. The fact that revealing my wealth changed his attitude only proved his respect was shallow, conditional. He was everything I had feared wealthy people were. Theodore's face went red. But to his credit, he didn't explode. He sat with the criticism. Forced himself to hear it. And finally admitted, in a voice that sounded like the words cost him dearly, that I was right. He had spent so long in circles where money was the only thing that mattered that he had forgotten how to evaluate people on any other basis. It wasn't quite an apology. But it was closer than I had expected. And it was enough for a starting point. We talked for another hour about Harrison Industries. About strategy. For the first time, we communicated as equals. Emma's relationship with her father also slowly began to heal. Though it would never be the same. She had seen Theodore's true character that night. But he was still her father. She set boundaries. Made it clear her marriage came first. But she remained open to rebuilding. Patricia reached out to Emma separately, apologizing for her silence. Emma listened, but felt little sympathy. Patricia's faded quality came from years of choosing to be powerless. Emma told her mother gently, but firmly, that silence was a choice. Patricia cried. Apologized. Emma accepted, while privately doubting much would change. As months passed, and life settled into new rhythms, I discovered something unexpected about living without my central secret. I felt lighter. Freer. More fully myself than I had in years. The constant vigilance had been exhausting in ways I hadn't fully recognized until it was gone. Removing that burden allowed me to engage with life more openly. Emma and I developed deeper intimacy as I shared more about my work, and she offered perspectives that improved my decision-making. We became true partners. We did eventually move. Not because our apartment was insufficient, but for the family we were planning to start. We bought a house in a middle-class neighborhood. Comfortable, but not ostentatious. With a good school system and a backyard. It cost less than 1% of my net worth, a fact that still made Emma shake her head. But it was perfect for our needs. We furnished it thoughtfully. It became a home in ways that felt authentic and earned. I continued my investment work, though more selectively. Focused increasingly on companies whose missions aligned with my values around sustainability and social responsibility. I discovered that having a public identity as a successful investor opened doors that anonymity had kept closed. It allowed me to mentor young people from backgrounds like mine. To speak publicly about the importance of social mobility and economic opportunity. To my surprise, I became a voice in conversations about wealth inequality, bringing perspectives from someone who had experienced both poverty and extreme wealth. Emma thrived in her work at the educational nonprofit. With my financial backing, they expanded programs significantly, helping hundreds of students. She found deep satisfaction in seeing the concrete results of our combined efforts. Students who were first in their families to attend college. Young people who started businesses. The work was endlessly challenging, but also endlessly rewarding. We were building a legacy that mattered more than any amount of accumulated wealth. The foundation we created together became a major project. Turning money that could have been spent on yachts and mansions into changed futures. Harrison Industries continued to thrive under Theodore's leadership, aided by my strategic guidance. The company's value continued to grow, which meant my net worth kept increasing, even though I was spending significant amounts on philanthropy. The mathematics of wealth at that scale were absurd. Generating returns faster than I could possibly give money away. I sometimes felt frustrated by the impossibility of meaningfully diminishing my fortune. But I tried to focus on the impact. On lives changed. 3 years after the revelation at the birthday dinner, Emma gave birth to our first child. A daughter we named Maria, after my mother. Holding her for the first time, I felt emotions so overwhelming I could barely breathe. A fierce protective love, mixed with terror at the responsibility, and hope for all the possibilities ahead. I thought about the child I had been, counting pennies, eating government cheese, studying by flashlight. And I thought about the childhood my daughter would have. Born into security, opportunity, freedom from financial fear. The gulf between those two childhoods was almost too vast to comprehend. I promised myself I would do everything possible to ensure my daughter understood how fortunate she was, without making her feel guilty. Raising our daughter, Emma and I talked constantly about how to instill good values. How to teach empathy and gratitude when you never experienced want. How to prepare a child to inherit wealth responsibly. We kept our lifestyle modest. Emphasized experiences over possessions. Involved our daughter in our philanthropic work from a young age. We wanted her to know her family's story. That her grandfather Daniel had been poor, and worked impossibly hard. That security was not something to take for granted. My mother Maria became a constant presence in our lives. Helping with childcare, cooking meals, telling stories about my childhood. She had softened in retirement, the hard edges worn away by finally having enough rest and security. She was a wonderful grandmother. Watching my mother play with my daughter, I sometimes felt so grateful I thought my heart might burst. Grateful I had been able to change our circumstances. Grateful my mother had lived to see my success. Theodore remained a complicated figure. Never quite warm, but no longer openly hostile. He made efforts to build a relationship with his granddaughter. I watched him with little Maria, and saw glimpses of a different man. Someone capable of tenderness, even if he rarely allowed it to show. I chose to focus on those glimpses rather than nursing old resentments. Life was too short. Emma's happiness mattered more than my pride. As our daughter grew, I found myself thinking more about legacy beyond money. I had accumulated wealth almost accidentally. But wealth alone wasn't a legacy worth having. I wanted to build something that would outlast me. Systems and institutions that would continue creating opportunity. That would help children like I had been find paths out of poverty. The foundation expanded its reach, funding programs that addressed the interconnected challenges of poverty. Affordable housing, childhood nutrition, healthcare access, all the factors that determined whether a child born into poverty would get a fair chance. I brought the same rigor to philanthropic evaluation as I did to investment analysis. Emma took the lead on many of the foundation's initiatives. She traveled to meet with community organizations, students, families. She told me stories that broke my heart and renewed my commitment. Stories of brilliant kids whose potential was being wasted because they couldn't afford books or lived in food deserts. Every story reminded me of my own childhood. Of how close I had come to being just another statistic of squandered potential. It reinforced my belief that talent was distributed equally, but opportunity was not. When Maria was 5, she asked Emma why they lived in a regular house when Grandpa Theodore lived in a mansion. Emma explained carefully that they had enough money to live however they wanted, but chose to live simply because things didn't make people happy. Relationships and experiences did. Maria asked if they were rich. Emma said yes, very rich. But being rich wasn't something to brag about. It was a fact that carried certain obligations. We wanted Maria to grow up with healthy attitudes about money. Understanding it as a tool, rather than a measure of worth. Understanding that our family's fortune was partly luck, not just hard work. We wanted her to know my childhood story without feeling guilty about her own privilege. To understand that poverty was a systemic failure rather than an individual moral one. As the years passed, I took on a more public role. Speaking at conferences, writing articles about conscious capitalism and the obligations of wealth. I argued that the system that had allowed me to accumulate billions was fundamentally broken. That no individual should be able to amass such disproportionate resources while others struggled for basic necessities. I advocated for higher taxes on the wealthy, stronger social safety nets, policies that would make the kind of mobility I experienced more common. These positions made me controversial in some business circles. But I didn't care about being popular with other billionaires. It's strange, the path life takes. I started out just trying to survive, then to protect my mom, then to escape a trap. I built an empire in silence, hiding who I was to navigate a world that wanted to put me in a box. And in doing so, I almost lost the one person who saw past all the superficial stuff, who loved the real me. Getting exposed was terrifying, painful, but it forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding. It shattered the walls I'd built, and ultimately it opened the door to a life of true purpose and authenticity. So, here's my question to you, after hearing all this. If you were in my shoes, knowing all the risks, all the pain, but also the potential for true freedom and impact, would you have kept that secret as long as I did, or would you have torn down the walls much, much sooner? I really want to know what you think. Let me know in the comments below.